Hello everyone. So today we'll be discussing some of the popular naming conventions or some naming variable naming styles of different programming languages, and particularly let's see what Java follows. Okay. So here you can see that there are many different types of styles in which you could name a variable, and particularly if you talk about Java, it follows something called as camel case. So what does camel case mean? So if you see username here, it is a variable name that is written here. Now the style, if you see here, the first letter of the first word is small, and from the next first letter of the next word is capital, so on and so forth if there are any more words. But the point is there is no space in between each of these words. So such variable names are camel case. So generally any variable name or any method that you write in Java, generally that follows a camel case notation. Okay. And there is something called as Pascal case. The only difference between camel case and Pascal case is if you make the first letter of the uh, word or the name as capital for a camel case, it becomes Pascal case. So all the words, first letter of the words will be capital, and there will be no space in between. That's Pascal case. And in case of Java, what all classes that you write, right? Every class in Java follows a Pascal case notation or style of naming a class. Okay. And next, there is something called screaming snake case, which means that you write all the words as capital letters, with capital letters, and then you separate the words using an underscore. So generally, in Java, the constants that you write, so they are represented using a screaming snake case notation, which is something like this: max underscore limit, where every letter is capital and you separate the words using an underscore. Okay. And there is a dot notation for packages in Java. You use this com dot example or something. These notations are separated using dot. So for packages you use this in Java. So these were the most popular naming conventions that Java adopts, and there is other notations like snake case, normal. This is used in Python more frequently, and there is also flat case where JavaScript adopts this more, so etc. so on and so forth. Okay. Now let's see some of the valid um, names of for variables. If you see the first one, it's a valid variable name because it's a purely a camel case notation of writing a variable name. So that is correct. The second one, hello underscore here, this is also correct and valid, and it will not give you any error if you write it in Java and compile it. So this is snake case, but then it is best practice that Java follows camel case for all the variable names. But even if you write it in a snake case format, it is still valid and your code will not give you any errors and your code will still run. But it is just not a best practice to write like this. But it's a valid thing. It's correct. And can a variable name can be a single letter like A? Yes, of course. And can it be something like capital separated with underscores? Yes, because as we discussed, this is screaming snake case, and this is generally used in Java for representing constants. And you have something called as username. It is a flat notation. It is also a valid one. It won't give you any error. Okay. If you see this, uh, one first N A M E something like this. The first character here, it's a digit, so it's invalid. You cannot start the variable name with a digit. Okay. So second one, hello hyphen here. So there is a hyphen in between. That is also not correct. Only underscores are allowed and no other special characters apart from dollar. And the word class. Class is a predefined word used to declare a class. So hence you cannot use this for a variable name. Same goes with for, because for is used to write for loop. So it's a predefined thing in Java, predefined keyword. So you cannot use it to write a variable name or declare a variable name called for. Okay. So username. Username here, the problem is there is a space in between. You can't write like string the user space name, something like that. It will give you an error thinking that these are two separate things, not one username. So you have to join it using underscore, or at least no space in between, or at least uh, something, but no space. Okay, no other special characters. There should not be any space in between. Okay. Now here comes the thing. So for every variable, okay. So for every variable, there are two things that you need to understand. One is the scope of the variable. The second is the lifetime of the variable. What is the scope of the variable? The scope of the variable is where the uh, particular variable is accessible for others to use. Okay, that is the scope of the variable. And the second part is lifetime of the variable. What is lifetime of the variable? Lifetime of the variable is something that how long that particular variable will persist in the memory, or will be available, and when it will eventually die or will no longer be available for use. So that is your lifetime of the variable. I hope it is clear. We will see with the example. Now here if you see the class scope, okay, so there is something called as class scope, method scope, and block scope. What it means is, here you can see some instance variables declared here with access modifiers, like private, public, private, protected, all these are access modifiers. And instance variables, okay, variables declared inside your class but outside your methods are called instance variables. We will discuss in detail about different types of variables in the upcoming tutorials. So for now, these are some variables that are declared here, and the scope of this variables is class scope. What does it mean? It means that these variables will be accessible anywhere inside the class. Anywhere as in they will be accessible inside this main method, inside this vertical print method, and inside this for loop also. And it will be accessible even outside this for loop, inside this method, and outside this method also. But the condition, it has to be inside the class. That is class scope. Now if you see this method scope, there is a variable here int length. Okay, this length is a new variable that is declared as part of this method. So the scope of this particular scope of this particular variable will only be inside this braces. Okay, inside this particular method. It can also be accessible inside this for loop, and it can be accessible even outside this for loop, but it must be inside this method. You cannot access this length outside this method inside this class. It will give you an error. Okay, now if you see this for loop here, right, the here if you see the variable I, this is declared. How can you say that a variable is declared? Wherever you see that its data type is defined along with the variable name, it means that it is declared, or that is the starting point of the creation of that variable. Okay, live, that's where it starts, the origin. So now here int I is equal to 0, this is where you have declared the variable. So now this can only be used inside this for loop. If you go outside this for loop, it will give you an error. You cannot access this I in outside this for loop and inside this method, or outside this method also. Like the moment you go outside this for loop, you cannot access this I. The scope will be dead. Now what about the lifetime? So the lifetime of these variables will depend on the scope. Once the execution of that particular variable in that scope ends, the lifetime of that variable ends. For example, if you have this method here, int length, the length, once this becomes inaccessible, or the scope of this length is gone after this method, then its lifetime is also gone. The lifetime of a variable only persists until its execution. So that is a statement. Okay. Now, if you see another visual representation here, so if you see here the scope, class scope, if you see, this is your class scope, and this is your method scope, this is your loop scope, and this is your block scope. This is your block. We'll discuss what are blocks and different types of blocks and everything later. So this is it. So that was it, and now let's go into some coding part. Okay, so let's start with some examples. Now if you see here, this is a local variable. Local variable, any variable declared inside your method, that's called your local method, local variable, sorry. So int x is equal to 10 is your local variable initialized with the value 10 and you are trying to print it. So it is accessible. If you run it, you will just get 10 as your output. So yeah, let me just run this. Okay, so now you got the 10 as output. Now let's see the next example. Now you see inside the main method you have int x is equal to 10 and you have another method called another method, and inside this you are trying to access this x. Okay, now it is already showing me red here that it is not correct. Now if I run this particular code, see it is giving that this variable cannot find the symbol. So it means that it is not able to find it because the lifetime and the scope is only until this block, right? So that is where it is. So the scope is until here in this braces, right? The moment you come out of this braces, the scope is gone. So that's why it gives you an error. Now the third one. So if you see this example, I've given an if block. I've written true, which means this if block will be always true, which is fine. Int y is equal to 20 and you're trying to print y. So the scope of this y is only between these braces. Okay, always wherever you declare the variable, just see what the braces it is wrapped around. Okay, only between those wrapped braces the lifetime of the scope of that particular variable will be there, and the lifetime will be until its execution, as I discussed. So here if you see the below line statement, if I remove this and if I try to run this, it will give me an error because y's scope is only inside the if block, it cannot be accessible outside. So if I comment this and if I try to rerun, it will not give me the error. So I've commented it. What are comments? I hope you know these statements which are uh, treated as some text and ignored by the compiler. These are not the instructions, those are comments, and these are single line comments in Java. The double forward slash is single line comment in Java. Okay, so the next one is see, this is a for loop again. Here int I is equal to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. You are trying to print all the I values here. Okay. The scope is only until these braces. So it is only until the for loop is there. Outside the for loop, you cannot access I. You see, it is giving me an error. Okay. So I'm not executing it because it's simple and straightforward. I hope you understand. And let's go with another example here. So student is a class here, okay, and int age is equal to 21. It's an instance variable. I'll discuss more about the types of variables in the upcoming tutorials. So this is something that is declared inside the class and outside the method. So it's an instance variable, and there is one method called display, and you can access this particular uh, variable here directly as we discussed. And inside main method we are trying to create an object of the student class. What does an object mean? So basically I'll discuss more about class and objects. For now, class is just like a blueprint, okay, and then you try to create objects of that particular class, multiple objects, which means that it's a clone of that particular class, and you can just create multiple clones and set values inside those clones or entities. That is something called as an object. So we are creating copies of this student class and creating an object, and I'm trying to set the value and I'm trying to access the value that is there in the age. So it will be working fine and it will give me no errors because I'm trying to access this variable from the object. Okay, things will be more clear, but this is accessible. Okay, and next one. So if you see this particular code here, this is a local variable x, int x is equal to 10 and x is greater than 5, it is always true, and int y is 20. This is block scope. This y will only be valid and accessible only inside this if block. That's why you can access it here and it will throw error here. Got it? And if you go here, okay, so the last example. So So this is another example where the int age is here declared instance variable, and you're trying to create two student objects, trying to set s1, s2, s20, 25, and you are trying to print them. That's it. So basically you're trying to access this age from the object. Inside the object s1, the age is there, right? That you are setting it to 20 and you are accessing that part. So that's why there is no error. So that's it for this video. Thank you.